Okay, so I have one of those good news, bad news type situations, but it's bad news for me, but actually really great news for you. So I have plenty of skin issues, trust me, but one of the things I've always been very fortunate in is I don't tend to get a lot of blemishes, and that's really great. No complaints there, except it does make it a little bit tricky because I have a lot of customers who will ask me how to cover up a blemish, and it's difficult to do a tutorial if I don't have something to work with. But I happen to have pesky little blemish right now. I don't love the location of it. Well, I should take that back. I actually love the location of it because when you look at me straight on, you wouldn't even know it was there, which is, again, great for me, but it's a little difficult to do a tutorial on, but it's what we have to work with, so we're gonna go with it. So I'm gonna show you 2 different ways using 2 different products on how you can cover your blemishes. So the first way I'm gonna show you is by using the darkest highlight shade in your 3D foundation. So when I color match someone, I always recommend 3 different highlight shades. And the darkest shade that I recommend, I always refer to it as sort of like a color corrector. And I recommend using it in areas where you're kind of trying to combat some of the issues that your skin might have. So things like dark under eyes, redness, dark pigmentation through sunspots or melasma or blemishes. Seint IIID Foundation is made up of creams, and some of the things that I love about it is that it's very lightweight and very breathable, and also that it allows for a buildable coverage. So you can go anywhere from a super light coverage to a much more full coverage, just kind of depending on what you want and what you need. Now, I feel like for the majority of women, they tend to fall more in that medium coverage range. Some might go a little lighter, some might go a little fuller, but for the most part, I feel like most people fall in that medium range. But when it comes to certain areas that you're color correcting, like dark spots and blemishes, you actually need more coverage. So my makeup coverage falls in that light to medium range. And when I'm typically applying my makeup, I usually take this brush right here. It's the blush and bronzer brush. And I usually just dip into my highlight color that I need, depending on the area. And then I just will stipple it on my face, maybe sometimes do some light buffing motions. And it provides me with this nice and even coverage. But if I were to do the same technique over a blemish, I'm not gonna get coverage on it. So let me just show you. So I just am stippling on that highlight shade. Now it's muted it down a little bit, but you can still see that redness poking through. It hasn't actually given me any coverage. So instead, what I'm going to do is I'm actually just going to approach the application in this area a little bit differently and be a little bit more intentional with my placement and how much product I am putting on the area. So instead of going on with a really big brush, I'm actually gonna switch over to this brush. This is called the multitasker brush, and it's double-ended like all of the Seint brushes, but I'm gonna use the smallest end because I want to have as much precision as possible when I'm trying to cover up this blemish. So I'm gonna take the small end of this brush and I'm gonna dip it into my darkest highlight shade. Now, this dark highlight shade is a color that I have used on the rest of my face in different areas like my cheeks and my nose and my chin, like I mentioned previously. But because those areas were just a little bit of a deeper pigment than the rest of my skin tone and nothing like drastic in terms of the deepness of the shade, just doing that light to medium coverage with a darker shade was sufficient to mute it down and to help it blend in with the rest of my face. But something like a zit, or if you have like a melasma spot, they have much deeper pigmentation. And so in order to be able to address that, you need to go on a little bit heavier with the makeup in that area and give it a fuller coverage to tone down that depth of color. So I've got the darkest highlight shade on the tip of the multitasker brush, and I'm going to very gently start placing that product directly on top of where that blemish is. And I'm gonna put the most of the concentration of the product right on the center of it. And then as it kind of starts to fade in color, I'm going to fade out the product around it. So that way it can blend in with the rest of my skin. Now, I personally am not a powder person. I tend to like that dewier finish, but when it comes to covering up trouble areas like blemishes or melasma, I want to make sure that the product does not budge and it lasts me all day long. So I do like to go in, I take the Vanilla Dust setting powder that Seint has. This right here is the powder brush. I love this one. The angles on it and the density of it is perfect perfect for applying powder in strategic places. And I will just dip that angled end into my vanilla dust setting powder, and I will just lightly tap it on to where I have that blemish, just to help set in the product and make sure that it doesn't move throughout the day. And then as you can see, that blemish is now gone, and all I did was use products that I already had in my palette. I just was more intentional about the placement of it and gave myself a little bit more of a full coverage in the area that was causing issues for me. Now, one thing I do think is really important to note at this point is that you will never be able to make a zit completely disappear. You can take away the color, you can make it kind of blend in with the rest of your skin tone and neutralize it, but the shape and the size and the texture is still going to be there. It doesn't matter what product you are using, there is still going to be texture, and if it is raised up a little bit from the skin, that's not gonna go away. And I think a lot of people tend to think that if it doesn't just completely vanish and there's no traces at all of a blemish, that the product doesn't work. But that is not true. If you can neutralize the area and you can make it blend in with the rest of your skin color, regardless of the texture or regardless of the fact that it might be raised up, then you've done what you can with that area. Because a zit is still a zit, even when you've neutralized it. So just make sure you keep that in mind when you are trying to get coverage with your blemishes. Now, I told you guys I was gonna show you 2 different ways to cover your blemishes using 2 different products. So the first one I showed you was using my 3D foundation, and I used my darkest highlight shade for that. The second way I'm gonna show you is using Seint Demi Correctors. Now, when you're using Seint Demi Correctors to cover up a blemish, it's less about covering it and it's more about neutralizing it. And I'm gonna show you what I mean. So if you are unfamiliar with Demi, Demi is a very unique product line. I've never seen anything else on the market like it. And what it is it's a product that uses color science and color theory to help remove distractions on your face by neutralizing the excess color in your skin that is creating those distractions. And this is where we start getting into color science and color theory. So we're gonna kind of rewind back to kindergarten and talk a little bit about the color wheel. So you've got your 3 primary colors, red, yellow, and blue. And each of those 3 primary colors has a complementary color or a color that is opposite to it. So yellow and purple are complementary colors. They are opposite to each other. Red and green are complementary colors, which means they're opposite to each other. And then blue and orange are complementary colors, which means they are opposites to each other. So when using Demi Correctors, you are gonna take that knowledge about the color wheel and about those primary colors and their complementary colors, and you are going to use it to help you with your application of Demi. And this is where Demi can get a little bit tricky, because being able to identify those colors in our skin properly, particularly in areas where we have distractions, that can be a little bit hard to do. So as much as I love Demi, I will say it is not for the faint of heart. You have to be really patient with Demi and learning the process and being able to learn how to identify the excess colors that are in your skin so that you can know how to properly neutralize them with the right colors. So I'll kind of show you what I mean. So when we are trying to color correct something with Demi Correctors, you're looking for what the excess color is in your skin, the color that you don't want there, the one that's causing the distraction, and you're going to use the opposite color of it to neutralize it. So going back to my blemish, this is where Demi Correctors can get a little bit tricky for people and where that patience has to come in. So when we think of a zit or a blemish, the first color we think of is red, right? And the opposite of red is green. So naturally, we are gonna wanna go in to our blemish with a green to neutralize it, but that is not always going to work. When we get a brand new blemish, usually at that stage, it is red. It is fiery, it is angry, and when it's in those early stages, a green can actually do a really good job of neutralizing it. But that fresh, fiery, angry red stage of a blemish is very short-lived. And eventually it starts to transition into a deeper, darker red. And when it gets into that deeper, darker red, it's not quite as fiery and angry. The excess colors in it, if you look really closely, are actually blue and purple most of the time, which means with that excess color of blue and purple, you actually need to use a yellow or an orange on it. And this is why I say that Demi can be very tricky, a little bit frustrating, and it's not for the faint of heart, because when you first get started with Demi, you are not gonna naturally think to put orange on top of something red to neutralize it. But like I mentioned before, we're trying to neutralize the excess colors in the distraction. And the excess colors that are coming through on that blemish most of the time are going to be blue and purple. So I'm gonna show you this in action. So I've wiped off the makeup I put on before on that blemish, and I'm gonna show you how I cover it using Demi Correctors. Now, it's really hard to be able to show you the colors in a blemish on camera. It just doesn't quite come through the same way, but this blemish is an older blemish, and so it tends to have a lot of darkness in it, and that's why I'm gonna go in with a color called O1, and the O stands for orange, so I'm actually going to use an orange on this blemish to help neutralize the excess blues that are causing that darkness in it. So I'm gonna take this brush right here. This is called the spot brush, and I'm gonna use this very small end of it. You want to use a very tiny, precise brush like this, because being able to use that precision in your application of Demi is key. So I've just dipped into that O1, and I'm just going to apply that color directly on top of that blemish. And then I'm gonna flip my brush over to this fluffier end, and I'm just gonna very softly kind of buff it out. And now you can see that blemish is gone. Now, one other thing to note about blemishes and the Demi Correctors is that sometimes you actually need more than one color. So sometimes the darkest point, which is usually in the very center of the blemish, can have that excess blue in it. But as it starts to kind of fade around the edges, sometimes that excess color can lighten up a little bit and it can be more of a purple. So sometimes you need to use that orange, that O1 right in the center. But then as it kind of gets to the edges, you need to use a different color, like a yellow, to neutralize the purple that's there. So the difference between the two different techniques that I used between 3D Foundation and Demi Correctors is that in the first technique with the 3D Foundation, I was using more product to get a fuller coverage on the area where I had the blemish. So that way I was able to cover up the blemish and help it blend in to the rest of my skin tone. Now, in contrast to that, with Demi Correctors, you're actually going to be using less product, and you're going to be using a color that helps to neutralize the area by going in with a shade that is opposite to whatever the excess color is in your skin that is causing the distraction. So, which is better between the two? Honestly, it's gonna be a matter of personal preference. When it comes to the 3D Foundation, some of the perks of it is that it's easier, it's faster, and it's probably stuff you already have in your compact. And so if you are brand new to 3D Foundation, I would say focus on that first technique and try to perfect that first before moving into the zone of Demi Correctors. Now, the thing that I love about the Demi Correctors is that it's going to give you a much more natural coverage on your blemishes. And what I mean by that is that you are not going to see any makeup texture. The texture of the skin will still be there. The texture of that blemish, like we talked about at the beginning, that doesn't go away no matter what product you're using, but you will not see any makeup texture when you use Demi because you're using so little product, and the product is not being used to cover the blemish and completely like overlay it. Instead, it's a little bit of product that's used to cancel out the excess color and neutralize the area, making it have a very natural finish. So I'm gonna go ahead, I'm gonna link everything that I use for this tutorial. Now, if you are already a Seint 3D Foundation user, if you're a customer of mine, you are going to want to use the darkest highlight shade that I recommended for you in order to be able to do that first technique, and then make sure you have the right brush. If you are not already a Seint user though, and you would like to get started with this makeup, I'm gonna go ahead and put my link here. I can help color match you to your perfect shades, and that will include that darker highlight shade that you can use for covering up blemishes. Now, I'm also gonna go ahead and link to the Demi Correctors on the site, and I will give you a list of the colors that I feel like most people should get started with. Usually people that are anywhere from like the light all the way up to like that medium tan range. If you have darker skin tones, let me know, and I'll have a couple of different shades that I'll wanna recommend for you. But these colors that I'm about to post are gonna be the ones the majority of people are going to use. And then I'm also going to include a link that gives you more information about Demi in general. And if you scroll to the bottom of that link, there are also some suggestions, including the ones for darker skin tones for getting started with Demi. I will also link the brushes that I use in this tutorial, and do not, I repeat, do not skip out on getting the brush for whichever technique that you use, because that will make all the difference. You need that small end of the brush to be able to get the right precise application to get that coverage. Now, I'm gonna link both of the brushes, and if you're kind of torn between the two, let me tell you what I love about them. So with the Demi one, I love the spot brush, and honestly, because it has more of a point to it, I think it's necessary for doing Demi. So I would use that brush no matter what. You could also technically use it for doing the 3D foundation application as well. The benefit of getting the multitasker brush is that I love that brush in general because you can do a lot of things with it. You can use it for eyeliner, you can use it for the spot treatment, you can use it for eyeshadows, you can use it for filling in your brows. So kind of like the name, multitasker, it can do a lot of things. So it's just kind of a good one to have in general when it comes to your makeup brushes. But I will say again, that Demi brush I think is essential if you're getting Demi. And then last, I'm going to link some information about the artist program. So if you are interested in getting started with the business side of things and you've been considering becoming an artist, I'll link some information that you can look over. And then if you decide that you want to join the artist program, I would love to work with you as your mentor here in Seint.